Hi there, welcome to the studio. It's a pleasure to have your company here. In this video, I want to share with you some of my pencil work and how I went about developing an idea for a project that's coming up very, very soon. I'm really inspired by cows. I mean, I love all sorts of subjects, but there's something about cows that has just really captivated me, especially all the way through January and here in February. And this is really the first major project that I'm going to be tackling in 2023. Now, my tier 2 and my tier 3, so the Atelier and the Academy patrons here on Patreon, already know all about this, and they might not have seen this video, but I have been sharing with them some special projects, including some assignments, if you will, where I've kind of thrown out the challenge to them as well, so they could work alongside me as I'm producing some of these works. But here for you in the studio tier, of course, my Atelier and Academy patrons have access to this video as well. I wanted to share with you this process because I don't think a lot of people really talk about this. This is where the idea starts. Now, you would have already seen me do a bunch of thumbnails, and rather than repeat those videos that I had done for my other two tiers, I thought I'd share a different idea, a slight variation on the process, and develop this and work this up into a composition. So here's the subject. One day I was just driving along on a country back road just above the township of Lawrence, where I used to live. We moved from there about 1.5 years ago. And it was a beautiful spot, amazing rolling green hills and pasture land. But it's here that I really fell in love with the animals. Just animals that a lot of people would just overlook and keep on walking or driving. But cows and sheep and horses have got such a presence to them. They're really beautiful when you just stop and look and appreciate them. And so I really wanted the cows to be the hero of this piece. And so as I was driving along, I saw these cows just chilling in a paddock, and the calves were with their mothers. Sometimes they get separated, you know, and here it was just nice to see them together. And they were just on this slight rise with these beautiful hills behind, and the depth and the color and then the drama in that sky. I was thinking, man, if there isn't an idea here. Thank you for this idea. And so I've been sitting on this for a little while. I wanted to develop it into a composition. But where do we start? See, I've got so many different photographs. When I'm out in the field, I'm just shooting like wild. I'm just taking all these different pictures, more pictures than I need. But you never know when that inspiration is going to strike, and you might need to call on that in the studio. Oh, if only I had an image of this or an image of that, or something that showed the anatomy here for this pose so I could reinterpret in that way. More information generally is better. So I like to have plenty of images. So when I see this situation on the side of the road, I'm just shooting like crazy. And I'm just stuffing those images into a file back in the studio. Now, I keep things pretty well organized on my computers in the studio and organize things on hard drive. So I had the folder there, and I was just kind of flicking through thinking about, yeah, I've got to get back to the cows. And this idea came up, and I'm like, what about that day that I saw this? Okay, so that's what I'm sharing with you here. And so where do we start? Well, I start moving through that reference file, and I start picking out highlights. And things that are really attracting me and just sparking that inspiration is the relationship between cow and calf, or the difference or the juxtaposition between standing and reclining. Like, this is a really relaxing, beautiful type of scene, but I want to compose it in such a way. So I start picking out animals from the reference and just go, okay, well, I'm just going to copy the photo and just draw the pose that I see here. And as I'm drawing, I'm starting to feel my way through the anatomy, through the light, through the form, and then something starts coming to me. So the place to start is just with whatever grabs you first, and draw that. Now, the idea here for this initial stage of the process is not to get a finished composition. It's just to study. It's just to learn. And if that is just copying the photograph, then so be it. But if you are going to copy the photograph, like I'm doing it here, let's try and do it consciously. Let's try and be really present in that moment and feel our way along and try to learn how that animal's put together and try to understand. Now, there is something that's really helping me while I'm drawing these cows. Let me get it. As I'm going through, I'm referring to this book, which is an atlas of animal anatomy for artists featuring the etchings by Dietrich. It was written by W. Ellenberger. You can find it under Ellenberger Animal Anatomy on Amazon. I'll put a link to that in the description down below. But here's an example of some of the anatomy that I'm talking about. So while I'm drawing my cows from my reference material, I'm referring to this. And that just helps give me a broader understanding of cows. And so I'm going to be able to paint them, hopefully, with a bit of authority. When I'm looking up to old masters like Julian Dupre or Zugel or Hans Heissen, when I'm looking at those artists, they had a real command for the animal in the landscape. Those guys knew how to paint cows. They knew how the cows were put together. And that just came from immersion and study. So without further ado, let's hit that sketchbook and start studying. There's something about this reclining cow that I really enjoy. I think it's the way the light travels down the back and picks up on details like the shoulder, and then it highlights the volume of the abdomen. But it's that light against dark, dark against light that I really enjoy. And I want this cow to be almost a proud silhouette against that violet background of the hill. But first I need to study and work out exactly what's going on here. Now, if you notice the way that I draw, I'm looking at things in terms of angles and shapes and trying to determine relationships. I'm not too worried about making mistakes here in the sketchbook. This is the place to make the mistakes. Again, it's not about turning out a finished drawing. It's more about learning. Long ago, I turned loose of perfectionism trying to create these beautiful pages in sketchbooks. Almost like you could lift the page out and frame it. I was thinking about this recently when I was looking at a bunch of posts on social media, in Instagram for instance. You see a lot of other artists that produce these beautiful sketches and then they will give you a sketchbook tour. And I think in a way this almost does a disservice to a lot of us artists, because we look at that, if we're aspiring to be great at what we do, thinking that, well, my sketchbook doesn't look like that. It's a bunch of scribbles. And therefore you're afraid to reach, strive, and try, because what if this doesn't work out? What if it's not perfect? I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out there because genuinely that's how I feel sometimes when I approach the drawing board and the sketchbook, because this is where you get exposed. This is where people can see exactly what you're made of. But that said, it's so important that we do this, because if we can't draw, if we don't have that hand-eye coordination, if we haven't developed these muscles, then it's really going to show up at the easel. At the end of the day, it's about command over the subject and our materials. And the only way to really have that is to put in the time and study. But it's directed time and deliberate practice that really makes all the difference. Now, that concept of deliberate practice I learned about recently in Cal Newport's book, Deep Work. This is a situation where you have forced learning. It's meant to be uncomfortable. It's meant to suck, if you don't mind the expression. This is where you're forcing yourself into a situation that doesn't feel easy, and you're literally retraining your brain. In order to grow, we have to be in an uncomfortable situation, but at the same time, we don't want it to be so uncomfortable that we're starting to cause stress. It's got to be a good kind of stress, a good kind of pressure, but not one that is debilitating. It's a very fine line. Now, some of the examples that Newport was using in his book were in regards to musicians, but I think the same goes for art. So this is something that, yes, absolutely, I enjoy it, but it is still a stretch for me. Now, a little something about the process here. I've been experimenting loads with
the paper as well as the pencils. So here I'm using a clutch pencil, and in there I've got a 2B lead. So to get any variation in the tones and to build up a drawing, I'm now working specifically with pressure. So for this deliberate practice, what I'm consciously thinking about is variation in line and weight, just based on how hard I'm pressing. Now, once again, you can see as I build up the shape of this calf, and here's my reference right here on the left, I'm thinking about how one line intersects another. I'm thinking about the shape overall, and I'm moving along relatively light. You can really see my construction lines here, but it's about to get a whole lot darker. And the way to achieve tone here is by just varying how hard I press on that page. And so that was something that I was trying to work on and think about is, yes, a lot of the tonal work is dependent on the hardness of the lead. When we go higher into our Bs from 2B all the way to 8B, that will really vary the darkness of the lines and shades we're able to achieve. But pressure has so much to do with that. So here with the 2B, I've got an enormous range by just pressing very light and then firming that up as I hone in on that final outline of the shape of the calf, as well as how those shadows fall across the body. Now, as part of my study, I was looking at this reference material, just thinking, these are really incredible animals and really beautiful shapes and poses. And what I want to highlight here in the final painting is the relationship between animals. Not only do I want to have a command over the subject matter, over the anatomy, which I'm still learning so much about, and I've really thrown myself in the deep end in terms of deliberate practice. I don't know what I don't know. There's so much to any animal in terms of the way it's put together that requires study. It requires some real due diligence as an artist in order to be able to paint it with any kind of authority. Just on a side note, anytime I make a post on Instagram or any other social media featuring an animal or heck, any kind of subject, there's always some person who is an expert of some sort or that actually knows a bit more than I do about that subject, and they will tell me in that comment section. And rather than get upset about this, I actually use it as a learning opportunity. I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but allow me to share this. Recently, when I made a post about my horse sketches, a horse artist commented and said, Andrew, you got a couple of anatomical issues here. But on the public post, she commented this, and I responded and said, tell me, hit me up, come on. I don't know what I don't know. Come on, I'm learning. So where am I going wrong? And she started to lay out some of the issues that I was having that I didn't know I was having based on what she could see. And again, rather than get upset about this, I really do enjoy that because it's another opportunity to grow. Even if it is uncomfortable and even if it is in public, I think it's important to realize that we're all works in progress and we can always do more to improve. We've never quite arrived. Now, on this calf specifically and on studying, what I'm thinking about here is the animal's anatomy, the pose, but also the relationship. So I want to be able to faithfully represent these cows and have them all be part of this scene. But because I'm going off script, and whenever I use that expression off script, your photographic reference represents the script, so to speak. This represents the outline, the narrative, but it's important that we don't follow the script ever. However, when we go off script, we can get into the weeds and we can start putting in some things that are not plausible, are not correct, maybe seem slightly jarring, maybe there's a bit of tension or discomfort within the composition. So what I'm concerned about here is I don't want these animals within this scene to look like they were just cut and paste out of my reference material. I want them to be anatomically correct, in the right position in terms of their perspective in the visual space. So the scale of the animal is important, and the way it impacts the ground and its proximity to the viewer, that has to be correct. But it also has to demonstrate something about the behavior and highlight some sort of relationship between the animals. I don't want this calf here to just look like a cut and paste job in front of its mother. The trouble is, at this stage, I don't have much of an idea or an indication about relationship. So in addition to studying the animal, I want to focus on how one interacts with the other. And so this is the part of the sketching process where I'm starting to think about that. Now, it might seem like I'm drawing animals in the sketchbook in a very disjointed fashion. I mean, there we had a reclining cow. Now we've got a calf. They are sitting obviously on different planes. One is just existing independent of the other. I'm just going to fill up this page with some random sketches of different scenarios. This is my think space. So here I'm going to draw out another cow, but this time I'm going to focus on that relationship between cow and calf. So here I start drawing in the mass of the body, the roundness of that abdomen. I think about the depth of the abdomen compared to the length of those legs. Where does that chest finish off? Where do those legs begin? What is the distance between the bottom of the hooves and just the top of the leg, just where it enters the chest, and then from the bottom of the chest all the way to the top of the shoulder blade? How do those relationships interact, or how do they look one compared to another? And so I'm thinking about that as I sketch this up with construction lines, then firm up these lines. And you'll notice here that I actually have several attempts at redefining the ground at where the hoof impacts the ground, because I continually think, no, leg needs to be a little longer. Nope, a little longer still. So again, I'm still thinking about this. But here with this cow, I'm thinking, okay, relationship. Now, how does the calf relate to the cow and vice versa? Here I was thinking that the cow should turn and face this calf. And then I had the thought, well, maybe I could use this calf out of this reference material, not the one looking back towards us, but the one just kind of nestled up against the mother. At least that's what I'm trying to do with my drawing, even though I'm not seeing it in the reference particularly. And then just start sketching this across. Now, it's very, very loose how I'm working here, but notice that because I've been pressing relatively lightly, I could just go ahead and change the position of the head. Here I change the position of the head 3 times before I settle in on that relationship. Similarly with the calf, I push it a little bit closer into the mother's body to try and highlight that relationship yet again. After a little while, my cow sketch here starts to look like Marcel Duchamp's nude descending the staircase. If you're familiar with that painting, it's the same figure over and over again, one superimposed upon another, as this cubist figure descends a staircase. So you can see multiple versions or iterations as the woman is walking down the stairs, even though it's a very abstract composition. So once I settle in on my final position here, I just erase some of those construction lines. It can get a little chaotic, a little scribbly, but there's something about that style of sketching that I quite enjoy. Again, I'm just erasing those lines just so I can see what's going on. Now, admittedly, I wasn't as happy with this drawing, but the point was not to finish a really nice looking sketch as a footnote here on the page. It's, again, to just highlight that relationship and really think clearly about how this could look in the final painting. As I'm following that reference, as I'm sketching along, I'm thinking, what's next? What's the next part? What's the next move? What's the next piece of this composition? Is there going to be another animal behind these guys? What about in front of? And even though I'm just drawing along, I'm not necessarily consciously engaged in what I'm doing. My subconscious mind, of course, is listening to the audio playing in the background, but my subconscious mind is chewing on the next idea. I'm always about 2 or 3 moves ahead in terms of thought process. It doesn't take long before I realize, yep, this has it, or no, I'm definitely on the wrong track. Even still, I'll go ahead and finish off the sketch to a certain point, just so I have really exhausted this as an option. I do decide after a little while, though, to reject this concept. I wasn't quite happy with the way the mother and calf were interacting. I mean, it could work, sure, but it wasn't exactly what I was going for. There was still something about that cow coming forward that I really liked, but the calf that is turned backwards, the difference in the orientation of the bodies really created something nice within the scene overall, I felt. So I wanted to get that back in there. Now, because I'm asked in every single sketch video that I do, why the cotton glove, I'm going to address it again here. I wear this to stop my hand leaching the oils which are present in everybody's skin. It sounds disgusting, but I want to stop those oils entering the page, and it also does cut down on excessive smudging because skin is naturally a little bit resistant against that page, so it really easily picks up that graphite and transfers it. I am still getting some smudging. I can't help that because of the way I draw. I am pretty close to the lead. Maybe this is something that I have to work on and come back on that handle a little bit, but I do still invariably smudge some of that graphite. A little bit of smudging I can tolerate, it's okay, but with just a bare hand, it's really noticeable. So here I start sketching out a new head position. I've stumbled upon some new reference here, and I quite like this animal entering the scene. I was thinking, okay, if I paint or draw the mother, I'm always thinking about painting because here I'm really concentrating on the composition and this as a means to an end. What's that final painting going to look like? So of course I'm already painting it in my mind. 3 steps ahead, right? But here I'm thinking, if the cow is just entering the scene and almost in a very nonchalant way, just not really paying much attention to the calf. The calf is just kind of a bit cheeky, kind of bouncing around, and then stops. It turns around and looks at us. And the mother is just, I don't know, almost got this way about her where she's like, here we go again, kid. I don't know. I'm just thinking of stuff in my mind. But this mother in this position here, I quite like. What I particularly enjoy about this bit of reference is the way the light shines off the bridge of the nose or the snout here, and how it highlights features across the brow ridge at the top of the skull. I really like that. And so I start sketching this up. I start thinking about it. I'm going very lightly with the side of the pencil first. You'll notice how I have a slight overhand grip when I'm blocking in some of those shades, and then I go around the outside of some of those areas of tone with some sharper, firmer lines. And then finally I thought, okay, no, one more little sketch I'll squeeze in here between all of these different cows. What if the mother cow was going into the scene the other way? And then, because I like the juxtaposition of bodies, or bodies going in different directions as a way to form vectors or tension within the composition in a good way. What if the mother here was going into the scene, so entering from the left, and then the cow was coming in from the right, and the two met at the shoulder? How would that look? Now this here could work very well, but then I just had the thought, cow butts, and decided to go in a different direction.
So after a little while, I fill up a page in the sketchbook with all sorts of different ideas and thoughts. And I'd done that one drawing of the cow's head, and I didn't quite finish shading it before I realized I should work this up into a much bigger drawing, almost a rendering. Still kind of loose and sketchy, but I want to work that up and really focus on the relationship between cow and calf, and start thinking also with my hatching technique about the direction that the paintbrush stroke is going to go in to define that form. So that's what I did next. I flipped open to a new page and began to draw nice and big just that cow and the calf. Now you might notice with this reference image that we've got the cow with 2 calves. So what I've done is I've removed one calf in the middle and put that one that's turning with the white face, turning back towards you. And I'm gonna push that right up against the mother. Now, this is very similar in a way to that master copy that I did of Lucy Kemp Welch's painting. Nice little tie-in there, and I hope to employ that kind of loose technique for this final painting. So that's exactly what I did. When I started this study, I wanted to put that cow with the calf that I wanted in the image, put those two right next to each other. So you're about to see that unfold. Let's hit the sketchbook and start drawing.
On a new page in the sketchbook, I start to map in the construction lines. And here I'm going to really think about the relationship between the cow and the calf, the central subject for this painting. This is what the composition is going to hang off. I want these two animals to be the focus, and so consequently I need to really concentrate on how they're built, how they interact with one another, and just do another study. Now, everything else in the composition is going to be supporting this major element as mother and calf. This is what the painting's about, so everything else has got to fit in with this. Now, often when I'm painting and I'm thinking about my subject, I'm thinking about focal points and the relationship between those focal points, which one's dominant, which one's subordinate, and often I'm juggling about 3 different major focal points, but there always has to be a primary one. So here I'd consider the cow and the calf focus 1, or primary focus. Now once again, you can see that I'm pressing very lightly, but because my hand's at a relatively low angle, I'm using the broad side of that lead in my initial construction lines. Sometimes I'll use that overhand grip, which I quite enjoy. But this is still something that I'm playing with and really learning about and training myself to do. I don't think you're ever done with drawing or sketching. And this is so vitally important for the artist to just spend time in the sketchbook and make these discoveries. I think this is how a lot of drawing is being done nowadays, and I'm actually quite surprised by some of the innovation that I'm seeing with drawing, with approaches to material. I mean, setting digital stuff to one side, if we're just looking at sketchbook work, there's some really incredible stuff that people are doing with texture effects and different kinds of paper and different kinds of marks. There's a whole bunch or a whole genre of charcoal drawing that I've seen where people are drawing charcoal portraits, for instance, and creating interesting drip effects. Who discovered spraying the charcoal drawing with acetone? Who discovered that for the first time? That's really something I want to know. I don't think it's something I'm going to do because it's kind of been done already and it seems a little gimmicky, but it does look really cool, though, if I'm honest. I'm not going to be spraying my drawing here with acetone, though. I'm just going to be sketching it out. But still, I digress. I think the experimentation is really exciting, and one of the things that leads to some of these innovations or discoveries is just spending time in the sketchbook playing. I'm not trying to be revolutionary or groundbreaking. I don't think that what I'm doing here is different than has been done before. People have drawn with clutch pencils before on cartridge paper in their sketchbook. People have held the pencil in a particular way. What I'm trying to do is just be authentic and honest about my approach. And what I find is that for me, within my process, I'm starting to do things that I haven't done before, even though I may have seen this somewhere previously. For instance, using the broad side of the pencil. I originally got that from looking at Ted Kautsky's work, somebody you should definitely have on your list. He even had a book called Pencil Broadsides, which was brought out in the 40s, I believe. But what others are doing is not necessarily important. I like to have an awareness of it, but it's more just about showing up and starting to draw, and you'll notice that you start to do things. It's like, oh, that's a bit different. That's a unique kind of mark. Oh, I didn't think it could look like that. and again, just spending the time here engaged in deliberate practice, those things are going to start coming up. I started to hone in on a bit of a process, and it went a little something like this. Construction lines first, then broadside of the pencil, which establishes your major blocks of tones. This is done in a very light way. Then get out a heavier lead in a different clutch pencil, broadside again, angle the handle up and down to form either a crisp lead edge or a back edge to that particular stroke, depending on what you're drawing. And then maybe come back and define the edge with a different kind of pencil. So it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm thinking about that as I'm going along, just feeling my way around that anatomy. So here with this drawing, I really want to think about the way that light shines across the face of the cow, as I mentioned before, but starting to think here about the tonal variation. Now, with my drawings on white paper, you'll know that I really enjoy working on mid-toned paper. You can see the tonal difference, by the way, between this Fabriano sand, which I'm using as a shield here. Often if I'm going to get really smudgy, like with this overhand shading technique that I'm using now, that will really have the tendency to smudge the drawing. I'll put up a paper shield. But notice the difference tonally between the sand paper and that underlying page. It's nearly black and white. It is a mid-tone, the Fabriano clay, but that's what allows the white chalk to stand proud of that surface. But because I'm working here with white paper, if I want to create a decent drawing, I need that full range of tonal values, which means I'm gonna have to go much darker than I think I should. Often, one thing I notice with my drawings and other people's drawings, especially when just starting out, is we don't go dark enough. We could go so much darker. Now that might mean we have to press harder, or we have to use a softer lead, so something above 2B, probably getting into the 4B or even 6B. Now there's a few other pencils that I'm starting to use and play with, and I'll probably get them out here in this demonstration. But the clutch pencil is not a bad one because you don't have to continually sharpen that pencil. I go through a lot of those Palomino black wings, and I'm starting to get a little sick of shaving it down with a razor, but here with the clutch pencil, all I have to do is just expose a little more lead. I've got my sanding block right next to my drawing board, so I just sand and shave down that lead to form a nice angle. But I have several clutch pencils on the go, and each one has got a different hardness in there. Now, I haven't used for these drawings, because I'm still playing with the pressure, of course, I haven't used any of the Bs or HB or harder than that. I've pretty much stuck to the 2B, and then I'll start using a 4B. I don't have a 6B clutch pencil, unfortunately. I think there's a certain point at where they stop going up or softer. So they stop getting so dark, because the softer the lead, the more support you'll need around that lead, otherwise it would just crumble. Now they can do some really interesting things to lead to make it hold up a little bit better and allow you to achieve that dark tone. There is one group of pencils that I really do enjoy using for really black shading, and that is the Staedtler Mars Lumograph Carbon Black series. Now from 2B to 4B to 6B, on those pencils, you can achieve some really dark tone. There's a certain point as well with drawing that your paper reaches a saturation point. But you'll notice here, I'm using that carbon black pencil. And notice how those dark marks go right over the top of that other graphite. By layering the pencil with just regular graphite, sometimes the paper just won't accept any more. You've already filled it in with that graphite powder. You've worked it into the surface of the paper, and it's almost like Teflon. New graphite just doesn't stick. But with the carbon black, it almost feels like a completely different material. It's almost like colored pencil in a way. But this is really nice for some of that depth of tone and darker accents across the drawing. So I'll use this in areas around the eyes, the nostrils, inside of the ear. It just really helps push down and then conversely lift out by way of contrast some of those lighter areas of the paper. Again, I'm having to press relatively hard, but go so much darker than I thought I would, because the only thing that's giving an indication about the highlights is the white of the paper. I'm leaving the white of the paper alone. And so we're only interested here in the dark tone, in the depth of the shade. As I'm drawing my way along, I'm thinking about stroke order, stroke pattern, how the paint is actually going to define this form. I think about form and defining form as if I was drawing contours on a topographical map. Have you ever looked at one of those maps and you've seen that little squiggly line that goes around little features in the landscapes, and then there's a little number there that defines the elevation that you're looking at, and you can really get a feel of mountains and hills and valleys based on the proximity of those lines and how they hug the landscape, even though you're looking down at it from above and it's just a symbol, it's a representation of the territory. It's not the territory, but it's a representation of the territory. And you can really get a feel of how that landscape's built. Well, this is almost a topographical way of thinking about drawing. You'll notice that there's a particular way that those lines curve around the muscle in the neck, for instance, or hug the form of the bottom of the chest as we have that flesh just between those front legs droop downwards. I'm actually drawing in direction of the muscles in the folds of the skin, very much like contours on a topographical map. This is one way to create some three-dimensionality within a two-dimensional black and white drawing. It's all contouring and then shading. For the most part, my contours and my shading go either with the form or directly against the form in a lateral direction. So again, you'll notice with the neck, the front of the chest, or even the arm muscle, they either go with the form, so longitudinally down, and so from the starting point of a muscle, for instance, or a wrinkle or a fold in the same direction, or across. And that way I can almost form a grid or a mesh or a network that changes and is manipulated by that underlying form. But the result is you have some sense of three-dimensionality. There is one other thing that I'm thinking about, though, especially when it comes to animals that are covered in hair, is there's a direction to the way the hair exits the skin and where it ends up at the end of those hairs. That could be defined by a brush stroke in a particular direction. Now let's say wind was hitting the back of an animal and it was lifting up a tuft. Then I would want those marks to stand on end in a way and indicate the wind that's blowing against the animal. But here I'm starting to make some indications to myself, not only in terms of shape and that underlying anatomy, but now contouring, the form, thinking about the hair growth and order. There are all these things that I'm forcing my brain to consider, and I'm really thinking about. And this starts to form that deliberate practice. It's anything but comfortable, but it is helping me grow. Now, in terms of the final technique that I'll be using in this painting, I'm going to go for something very loose and very painterly. I was so inspired by those recent master copies of Lucy Kemp Welch and Arthur Wardle. And I really want to get some of those chunky painterly vibes in this piece. As I'm drawing along here, I'm thinking about the brushstrokes. How is this brushstroke going to define this ear? How many brushstrokes could I get away with? Could I do this with one? Probably not. Could I do it with 3 or 4? Yeah, maybe. If I focus on the edges and then maybe define edges with surrounding brushstrokes. And then I'm thinking about, okay, well, what kind of brush am I going to be using? I really enjoyed some of those chip brushes, if you'll recall those demos. If you haven't seen those, you'll find the long or full version of the Lucy Kemp Welch master copy here on Patreon. But those chip brushes had a beautiful broken end to them, and they would form some really nice painterly random marks, even though they're a very cheap, disgusting brush. And even though they do drop a few bristles, as long as I'm aware of that and pick them up as I go, it's not a problem. The more you use that brush though, and the more bristles that come out of it, there's a point where it just gives up and stops dropping bristles. It's dropped all it's gonna drop. So after a little while, they do become quite enjoyable to use after the first few bristles fall away. Now I'm beginning to use the side, as you could see, of the carbon black pencil. Now I don't use a regular pencil sharpener. I use a razor or an X-Acto knife. And what that does is it allows me to taper the end of the pencil more and expose more lead. When you use a standard pencil sharpener, the kind where you put the pencil in there and you twist it around, it can damage the pencil. I found sometimes that razor can grip that lead and shear it off as you twist it inside the device. Some of those mechanical pencils that you wind the crank, those mechanical pencil sharpeners, they can be better and they can work very well because with the wheels that are inside that, it's a gradual shaving down of the pencil. But nothing really compares to doing it by hand and then exposing plenty of lead and then shaving it down further on a sanding block. Now, of course, it's so much quicker to use a clutch pencil, but here with this carbon black, just have a look at how much of that lead is exposed. Now here I've got to be very conscious, hyper aware of how hard I'm pressing. Too much pressure, and I'll snap that lead right off. And then I have to shave down even more pencil to expose the same amount of lead. You end up chewing through pencils very quickly if you're not careful, just by pressing too hard and breaking the lead off at the end. Now I've taken a slightly different approach technically here with this calf compared to the cow. And you'll notice the difference in the tones. Because I've used so much of that carbon black, it's taken on a very matte finish, a very deep black finish. Some of those shadows really sink away to nothing. And I've only used a touch of the other pencil, the clutch pencil with the 2B lead. A lot of this is that carbon black lead. Now this pencil here is also 2B, but notice the difference in the depth of the tone. Now here you can really see that contouring in full effect with the way the line warps across the rear of this calf. And the curve in those lines helps define that form much more. Now there's something I like about this relationship between calf and mother, and I think in the final painting I might move that calf even closer, but not so close where the cow is casting a shadow on the calf. I still want that beautiful sunlight to strike the face of the calf and move down the neck. Here I'm thinking about light against dark, dark against light. Notice the contrast between the calf's head and the mother's body. That is intentional, that is deliberate. And so I really want to make sure that I highlight that calf by having that pop of contrast there. But one thing I really enjoy about the position here of these two animals is how similar it is to that Lucy Kemp Welch painting. And again, for reminder's sake, here it is here, And you'll notice how the foal is right up against the mother. Now, even though I might have a bit of separation here for the sake of lighting, I think it's similar in a way, and I do enjoy that. So I'll consider this a bovine homage to Lucy Kemp Welch. Now, there was one thing about that Lucy Kemp Welch painting in the orchard that was just stunning. And as I was going across, it was a struggle for me to think about the foreground and the weeds and the grass and some of the brushwork that was underneath the horses. I'm going to be getting a bit of that looseness in my final painting, but I scribble in a few weeds just under the cow and the calf. But I'm thinking that in the final painting, it's going to get pretty chunky. Now, finally, I go about cleaning up my drawing, and I do this with a couple of different mechanical erasers. I've got your stock standard mechanical eraser with a nice big 5mm lead, but I also use a Tombow Mono Zero. And it's important to have a brush handy. Here I'm using a big broad drafting brush to clean off the eraser dust.
I'm now starting to form an idea about how to put this painting together. So now I go through a thumbnail process where I design this up into tiny little squares and work out my composition. Now, you've seen that loads, and the other tiers, the Atelier and Academy tiers, have seen full pages of thumbnail sketches from me. So I won't bore you with the thumbnails, but let me just say right now, if you are going to design any composition, make sure you do this step first. So a thumbnail for me is about, oh, look, I'll just show you. So this is what I have to do before I even start drawing it up as a finished composition. Now, I've done lots of studies, but it's the work here that will pay dividends at the easel. Now, my thumbnails are so incredibly simple, and I generally do 3 to 4 before I draw that up into a bigger sketch. And each time I repeat the process, I'm asking myself what's working, what's not working, and what if. If you've seen my critique videos, it's exactly the same process that I'm doing there. I'm not only critiquing your paintings in those critique videos using this process, but I'm critiquing myself as I'm going through this. And it's a great way to get out of the subjective into the objective. When we're stuck in the process, we can't see the necessary next move. So this allows you to take a step back and really think about that from almost a bird's eye view. And you can see your composition, you're like, aha, that's what I need to do. That's gonna make a winning painting. So I've got a fairly good idea about the design of this final piece. So let's hit that sketchbook and draw out our composition.
Now it's time for us to think about the final composition. I already know that this painting is going to be on a 30 by 40 inch canvas. I've got that ready to go. And so I begin to first sketch in the right proportion, height to width, and then start to work out exactly where the animals are going to go. Where's the front lead edge of the cow, and then the calf, and then where those back halves going to exist. So you'll see here that I've got a couple of vertical lines in the scene. I then map out where those contours of the hills are going to be in the background. But I've thought long and hard about how this composition would work, and I do a thumbnail process where I'll draw multiple variations of the composition over and over and over again on a sheet of paper or in the sketchbook before I get to this stage. So I've glossed over that and I've skipped that step here deliberately because my tier 2 and tier 3 students here on Patreon would have already seen that video. But if you're watching this and you're just in the studio tier, then you've got a whole bunch more material to get into if you'll move up a tier or 2. I highly recommend the Academy tier. Again, sorry for the little plug here, but if you want to know how to change your membership or upgrade, have a look at that link in the description here on Patreon. And what's happening in the academy in particular is a whole bunch of directed lessons with briefs. And so if you want to push the drawing and the painting this year and have a bit more focus with some of these projects, if you want to work alongside me, as I'm encouraging a lot of my atelier students to do, with sharing the reference material, sharing my approach to the painting, my approach to the drawing, and then providing a pretty detailed brief about, okay, here's how this project's going to go, and I'm going to do it too with you. If that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, then go ahead and check it out. And again, just try it for a month. If you don't love it, I'll refund your money. No problem at all. It's my intent that you get as much as you can out of your art this year and push it as far as you possibly can. So check that out. There's a whole long video there on the thumbnail process and some rougher, looser sketching techniques, as well as a color study that was developed as part of this series. But I've also got a whole bunch more painting demonstrations coming very, very soon. Anyway, right here with the composition, you'll notice, again, with my construction lines, I've mapped out exactly where that mother and calf is going to go. You can see that, the reclining cow now, and then a couple more just reclining that are clipped by the edge, the right-hand edge of the composition. Now, you might be thinking, Andrew, I've seen in your critique videos that you say don't place anything on the edge, that it's either in or it's out. That's right. I'm still sticking to that pretty firm. But that comes with anything that's a primary focus or dominant within the composition. In order to create something that is kind of natural looking, if I can use that expression, you sometimes can clip an animal here or there or have it look as if it's not necessarily conscious of the edge. I don't want it to look too composed, so sometimes having an animal that's cut off by the edge of the composition or the edge of the canvas can actually appear a little bit more natural and a little bit more accidental, as if we happened upon this situation, despite the fact it's heavily composed. I've seen Alfred Munnings do this. I've seen Lucy Kemp Welch do this. I've even seen Arthur Wardle do this in particular instances, and it achieves this effect where it's very natural looking, it's very organic. The main concern is the cow and the calf, the mother and child here in this painting. And so as long as that is clear of a couple of areas, I don't want either one of those animals clipped by an edge, but I also don't want them in the dead center. You'll notice that they are central, absolutely. But I've been thinking about, where is my diagonal that connects the top left to the bottom right corner, the top right to the bottom left corner, the vertical center and the horizontal center, almost forming like a Union Jack across the composition. I'm thinking about those lines and going, right, now where's the dead center? Where's the bullseye? Okay, just don't have the heart or the head of the animal, the main animal, which is probably the mother here. Don't have that in the dead center. It's close, it's central, but it's not smack bang in the middle. Now, when you place the calf with the cow, they form a mass when they're together. And so notice how it's kicked over to the right a little bit more. That'll become more apparent as I get some darker tone in here. But it's kicked over to the right, closer to that right-hand edge than it is to the left. So I start off pressing pretty light to achieve some lighter tones for those clouds in the background. And I'm thinking about the hillside, in particular that shade in the background. I notice in my reference that there's a beautiful violet that's coming through. And the way that pops or sinks back when you compare it to just little tufts of orange that are illuminated by that sun on the backs of these cows, that juxtaposition and that rattling of color is really nice. So we're going to have a tonal contrast here as well as a color contrast. Now, of course, I can't communicate that with the black and white drawing, But I'm thinking to myself as I go, this is going to be a really nice moment to separate out this cow from the background. The one thing I do have under my control here, or at least as a consideration because I'm drawing it here in black and white, is my tonal relationships, the value. This is important when it comes to designing a composition. And this is a compositional workup or a compositional study. So I'm thinking about, okay, where are my lightest lights going to go? Now, sure, I'll be able to get more nuance and variation when I actually paint this, but I want to know that's going to be a light hillside. Okay, so if that's the case, how is that going to contrast against the top shoulder of the cow? Light against dark, dark against light. Am I going to lose the back of this cow, tonally speaking, against that background? Well, I better not. So I have to darken the cow. So as I begin to develop this and deepen the tone, it starts to separate the animal out from the background. This is much needed clarity when I'm thinking about my composition. I need that clarity. I need to be able to see, here's what's going on. Here's the relative position of the animal in the landscape. It's not just about the outline, which defines the perspective in the landscape, but it's also about that visual space that's created by controlling tone and thinking about contrast. Once again, in terms of process here, I've started with that relatively light pencil, the clutch pencil first, just working with the broad side, but also just the end of the pencil, working my hand across very, very lightly, just forming some sketchy lines. I'm not pressing hard at all. I haven't made any grooves or divots in the paper, so the pencil glides across that surface really nicely, just shading the tops of the texture. You'll notice that there is a little bit of texture to that paper, and so you get these tiny little white spaces between the darker high points as that pencil shades across. Once I've established an area, then I might press harder and define the line further. Probably not in that background. This is mainly for the animals where I want to really clearly define the edge, like this reclining cow here against the right-hand side. Now, there's another little moment of focus or a little visual treat for the viewer. I like that bit of reference where I've got the calf just peering behind one of the other calves, and you can just see that cheeky little face there. And I thought this would look really nice up against a mother in the background. So here, once I've defined the depth of tone of the shadows on my main animals, I'll take that carbon black, I'll sand down one surface or one face to that lead, forming a sharp point, and then begin to define the outside edge or the outline. Now, this is not supposed to be a photographic, labored rendering of these cows. Again, a lot of what I'm using here is gesture or symbols in a way, if I can use that expression. It's very symbolic of what's going to happen in that final painting, almost like a map, again, of the territory. So I can see clearly this is where the mother's going to go. Here's where the light's going to go. Here's my area of depth of tone. Here's my lighter tones here against the lead edge where the animal's just caught in that sunlight. It's a really simplified approach. But by the end of this process, I should have a very clear idea about what the painting's going to look like, at least from a compositional standpoint. Now from here, I'll make a color study, and the color study is a vital component. Now, the sketch and the color study and my reference material will then sit on the easel next to the final project as I begin to paint. And you'll be surprised how much I actually refer to my own drawing as reference, as well as that color study. It's vital information. The reference is really important too for just details, surface details, information about texture. maybe something about color, maybe something about tone. But for the most part, I'm looking at this drawing. This is giving me that vital information on the arrangement of animals. But I'm also looking at that color study for relationships between one color and another, or one tone and another. By the time we're done with this process, from doing a compositional workup like this and a painted color study, or heck, even a digital color study, hopefully our image takes on a completely different look than that initial reference material. When you compare that final reference with our final compositional design, you'll be able to see, oh, that's where that idea came from. Oh, neat. Okay, I like what you did with it. That should be our reaction. Even when we're critiquing ourselves, I'm talking to myself that way. You know, hey Tish, I like what you did here. Yeah, I talk to myself in the third person. It helps. It's part of the artistic process. But it's really interesting how it just takes on a completely different look. There's the seed of the idea, as I say, in your photographic reference, but you haven't copied the photo. I still find it so amusing when people look at this and they go, and it happens all the time. They go, oh, why don't you just copy the photograph? Why don't you just print the photograph out rather than copy the photograph? Better yet, just print the photo on the canvas and be done with it. Why even paint it if you're gonna just be a photorealist? And then I think about it and I go, well, this isn't photorealism. I'm not painting like a photograph captures an image. Even with a lot of detail, it's very different. I also think that people that say this don't paint. They don't understand how fun it is to actually be involved in the process. I'm the process guy. I love the process. I get really caught up in the actual act of making the thing. It's not just about creating a final product. It's about having fun making this thing. But it always looks so different to the first initial reference material that gave me the idea. And I really enjoy that. I really, really enjoy that. Here, I'm thinking so much about that master copy that I made, the heavy, chunky brushwork of the dock that was in the paddock in front of those horses in Lucy Kemp Welch's In the Orchard painting. So I'm thinking I'm going to get a bit of that here in this composition with some of these chunky weeds down here in the bottom left-hand corner. And so just a little indication of breaking up that surface. I outlined some shapes. I shade in some rather abstract looking marks. I've got the seed heads or the flower heads dried of those thistles there and the broad leaves of the dock. And as they turn, they're going to be catching that sunlight and then shading out other leaves in various ways. It's quite interesting. I think it will add some much needed interest, but break up that bottom left-hand corner where not much is going on. And it could do one of two things. It could lead the eye in towards those cows, but it could also stop the viewer exiting the canvas. Now that's about vectors. I talk about that a bunch in my critique videos, so make sure you check those out if you haven't already. Now I'm really happy with this composition. I know it could be better. It can always be better, but I think I'm going to go ahead and paint this one. I'm pretty happy with it.
Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this video and you've come away with something to think about. As I mentioned way up front, I just wanted to share some love with you here in the studio tier, and of course my Atelier and Academy patrons have got access to this video as well, so I wanted to make it a little bit different, something that those other tiers hadn't seen. But I also want to encourage you that if you want to try this process and even try your hand at the brief and have access to that monster reference file and what we've been working on for all of January, it's not too late. It's not too late to dive in now and take your techniques even further. So all you have to do is upgrade your membership by clicking that link down below. And I'll put that link in the Patreon description. And that will be instructions on how to upgrade your membership. Now, why would you want to upgrade your membership? So you could spend more time in the studio here with me and take your art and your techniques even further. So if that sounds like you and you want to push yourself to the max this year, then go ahead and sign up for that Academy tier. Try it for a month. You've got nothing to lose, because here's what I'm going to do. If you don't completely love what you're learning at the Academy tier, I'm going to refund your money in full for what you paid for that month. So you literally have nothing to lose. Just try it for a month, and if you don't love it, money back. I feel so confident that you're going to love what you're learning at that higher tier. I've poured a lot of time and effort into that content, and I'm hearing really good things from the people that have signed up to the Academy. All right, I'm going to get out of here, get back to drawing, and get back to painting. I've got something cool to do. I'm sure you do too, but I've really appreciated your company while you've been spending this time with me here in the studio. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'll see you again in the next video.